today's class, we will discuss about class as well as object in Python. Right? So what is a class? What is an object? We will discuss in a while. So before going to that, there are types of programming languages. So structured programming language, object-based programming language, as well as object-oriented programming languages. Object-oriented programming languages. What are structured-based programming languages? Like if I can say, it is very important concept, you should listen carefully. C language is a structured programming language, as well as Python. Why these are called as structured programming languages? Because these languages does not support object-oriented principles. What are object-oriented principles? Class, object, polymorphism, inheritance, abstraction, as well as encapsulation. So, but Python is somewhat exception. We will discuss at last. Don't worry. Next, coming to object-based programming languages. Object-oriented is different. Object-based is different. So coming to object-based programming languages, it only supports class as well as object concepts. Only supports class as well as object concepts. So if you can see Visual Basic, VB Script, Python, these comes under object-based programming languages. But see, if you observe, Python is structured object-based as well as object-oriented. So Python supports all kind of types of programming languages. Coming to object-oriented. Object-oriented. So what is meant by object-oriented? If a language is an object-oriented programming language, it should support OOPS principles. What are OOPS principles? Class, object, polymorphism, inheritance, abstraction, as well as encapsulation. Very, very important. So Java is an object-oriented programming language. Similarly, C++, C#, as well as Python is also an object-oriented programming language. If you can observe, Python structured, object-based, as well as object-oriented. What is difference between object-based, object-oriented? If you can see, only class and object will be supported in object-based, right? Similarly, along with class and object, there are some concepts like polymorphism, inheritance, abstraction, as well as encapsulation. If these are also supported, then it is object-oriented programming language. So why the Python is structured, object-based, object-oriented? So Python lets you organize code with functions. We can write the code in Python with functions or without functions. So that is the reason why it is structured. If a program want to support OOPS principles, definitely it should support functions. So, but in Python, we can write a particular code with the function or without function, right? So that is the reason why it is structured, right? So if you can see, let me create one Python file. Suppose like class and object. You will not be familiar about class and object. What is class and what is object? Let me discuss with you in a while. So if I can say you, suppose print of, this is first program. So if I execute this, then this particular statement which I want to be printed, it is printed in the console. I can print this particular line of code. I can execute this particular line of code with the help of function also. This is without function. And I can do the same action, or I can execute the same thing with the help of function. How I can execute? I can define a function as said yesterday. Function will have def and function name. Let me take that as one random name, right? Let me try to use this particular statement here to be executed. So if you can see, upon calling a function, the same can be executed. Let me comment this right now. So the same is executed. So we can execute program. We can write a program with the class, with the function, or without a function, or with the function. So that is the reason why it comes under object-based as well as object-oriented as well as structured programming. Structured programming, there is no need of function, right? We have done that in Python, right? Good. So we can, in object-based, it has to support class and object. Yes, Python supports class and objects. So if it has to support class and object, indirectly it has to support functions, right? So similarly, object-oriented, definitely Python also supports object-oriented programming language. Other than class and object, we can see polymorphism, inheritance, and abstraction. We can see one by one in the later classes. Don't worry right now. Right now in our class, we will discuss only about class and object in Python. Similarly, In Java, even if you want a single line of code, we have to create a class. If in Java, even if we are executing some set of statements, definitely we need to create class. It is very, very important. So that is the reason why Java is purely object oriented. What I am saying, purely object oriented. Purely object oriented programming language. If it is an object oriented programming language, for everything we have to create a class. Without a class, we cannot go further. But in C#, C++, Python, we can write a code without creating a class also, as we have seen like this. Without creating, similarly, what I'm saying, if I am saying class, just for now, just try to think of function. But class and function are different. Let us try to define you what is the difference between those in a way. So what it is saying, we can write a code without creating a class as well. If you can see, without creating a function also, I have written or executed this particular set of statement. Right. Similarly, what is a class? A class is a collection of various statements, such as variables and methods. Let us try to see what is actually a class as well as object. So if you can see what is a class, class is a collection of variables and methods. Collection of variables and methods. What are variables? Variables are nothing but the properties of particular element. Similarly, what are methods? So an object can perform certain number of actions. Those are nothing but methods. So at last, in a single point, what I can say, class is a collection of variables and methods. Similarly, what is an object? What is an object? So object is nothing but it is an instance of class. It is an instance of class. Coming to class, it is a logical entity. It is not exist physically. But coming to object, it exists physically. We will see all these points one by one with an example. Don't worry. Right? So class, if it is a logical entity, it does not occupy any space in the memory. But if it is a physical entity, then it occupies certain amount of space in the memory. So let us take an example of class as well as object. So if I can say class, employee is one class, animal is one class. So under employee class, there are different types of employees like John, Scott, Mary, Suresh, so on and so on. Right? Under animals, we'll have different type of animals like dog, horse, elephant, etc. If you can see, employee is a class, what I am saying, but John, Scott, Mary are objects of this particular class. These comes under class consist of objects, right? So employee is one class as well as other employee, it is having different type of objects. So similar, so that is the reason why employee is a logical entity. If you can see, John exists physically, Scott exists physically, Mary exists physically. Employee does not exist physically because, so suppose if you can take in a company, employees will be there. I am saying literally employees, but employees is a logical entity. But coming to physical employees, like John is an employee, yes, he exists physically. Similarly, Scott is an employee, he exists physically. Mary is an employee, he exists physically. Similarly, in a similar way, dog also exists, horse also exists. We can see that, right? So those are nothing but physical entities. We cannot feel and touch. Those are nothing but animals. Can we feel and touch animal? No. But dog, horse, elephant can be feel and touch. So these are physical entities and these are logical entities. Similarly, class is a logical entity, object is a physical entity. Another important point, for one class, as like here, this is a class, we can have multiple objects. That is the important. For one class, we can create multiple objects. If you can see, this object is different from this object. So these two are independent, I can say. These all are independent. So objects are independent. Similarly, objects contains or acquires their own copy of variables and methods present in the class, but the values of objects will be different. You will not understand this point right now, but let me convey you simply with one example. So what is the class? Class is a collection of variables and methods. So when you create an object, right? So all the variables and methods which are there in the class will be acquired by object. This is what it is saying, but this will understand when we get an example. So if you can see, so this is one employee, this is a class. So under this employee, you will have employee 1 as John, employee 2 as Scott, employee 3 as Mary, right? These are three objects, employee 1, employee 2 as well as employee 3. So for every employee, ID is different, right? Name is different, job is different, salary is different, as well as bonuses are also different. So that what it is saying, objects contain or acquire their own copy of variables and methods. So what are the variables and methods? This particular class is having these variables and methods. So when you create an object, these variables and methods will be acquired by these objects. If you can see, employee 1, employee 2, as well as employee 3 will acquire same set of variables and methods, same set of variables and methods. So let us try to create one example so that you can understand what is a class as well as what is a method. Before going to this, we will see one difference. We will see one difference. What is a method? What is a function? This is somewhat a little bit rough concept. You should practice thoroughly. Until unless you will not get anything. Try to revise this particular material number of times. So before going to create a class example, we will see one difference. What is a function? What is a method? But in Java, method and function both are different. But in Python, as I have said you yesterday, function is different as well as method is different in Python. What is a function? If we create a function inside a class, it is nothing but a method. If we create a function inside a class, it is nothing but a method. But if we create some set of variables with some name, it is nothing but a function. If we create that same function inside a class, it is nothing but a method. Right? Let us try to see one example. What is a class? What is a method? Right? You will get to know what it is trying to say. Right? So let me create one function right now. What is a function? A function starts with def keyword and function name. Like let us try to take display as some function name. Similarly, this function takes name as an argument. Yesterday we have seen different type of arguments, positional, keyword, as well as default arguments. So for this, what I'm saying, I'm just trying to print that name. What the argument I am passing to this particular function, I'm trying to print that in a console. So when it prints, upon calling, it will print. So how I am calling? Display of, I need to pass that argument variable. So let me take here Scott is the argument value which I am passing here. Right. This is a function. This is the function declaration. This is calling that particular function. Right. Let me execute this. This is Scott. Yeah, it has printed. This is about the function. But what is a class? What is a class? Class contains collection of variables and methods. Class contains collection of variables and methods. In a while, you will see how we can define a variables in a class. Don't worry. Right now, what I'm saying is how I can create a class. So in order to create a class starts with class name, right? As like function starts with def keyword, class starts with class keyword, right? I have to define the class name. Suppose my class I am defined. I class I am defined. So I have to use colon and thereafter I need to use the function. So what I am doing, I am defining the same function inside a class. So what it is doing, I have created a class. Inside the class, I have created a function. So in order to create a function inside a class, it is nothing but a method. Always for a method, you have to use self keyword. Very important. If you create some set of statements with some name outside, it is nothing but a function. But if you create the same function inside the class, it is nothing but a method. So always for a method, you should use self keyword. What this self keyword does? This self keyword will refer to this particular class. What is doing? Self keyword is always referring to this particular class. Right, good. Up to now, you have declared a function, you have invoked the function. Similarly, what I have done, I have created a class. Inside a class, I have created a method. Then, how I can invoke this particular method? In order to invoke any method inside a class, first I have to create an object. So in this case, any name you can try to take. Suppose obj I will take. Obj, it is an object. Object is equal to, I have to create instance of class, my class. You will not understand this. Upon practicing, you will get to know. Up to here, like some 30% of in my class. But upon practicing, you will get more things, right? So in order to invoke a method, you should create an object. You should create object. So this particular object should have instance of class. So with this object, I can invoke this particular method. So how I can use that object dot display. Display is the method name here. For this method, I have to use argument value. So for this, in this case, what I'm doing, I'm using Scott only. Right? Let me take, instead of Scott, Mary. Right? Let me comment this. So let me try to execute this. So if you can see, the same has printed. So in the same way, how we are invoking the function, we have to invoke the method in the same way. But only difference is, if we define a function inside a class, it is nothing but a method. So in order to invoke the method, we have to create the object. And similarly, by creating object, we can invoke that particular method. So it is very easy, no confusion. All these points are mentioned in the material. So if you can see, what is a function? Without a class, we have created. So what is a method? We have created the same function inside a class. It is nothing but a method. So by default, every method will take an argument as self. So this is one method which is defined inside a class. Let me take another method. Suppose I can change that name as like, suppose let me take suppose I'm giving some random name as purity. Like for this, I am giving the argument as name. So how I can invoke this particular method? Similar in this way. Once we have created that object, how many number of methods are there? We can invoke all the methods by using the same object. Similarly, in this way, display of purity. Like, let me take in this case Scott, because the name accepts a value, right? So here, this is nothing but it is not a parameter. This self is always referring to this particular class, right? Don't confuse. Name is different, self is different. Self is nothing but when we define a function inside a class, what is the difference? So in order to make the difference, we use self keyword. This self keyword is always refers to the particular class which this method is defined, right? Here also. So we can invoke the methods in this way only, right? So always methods will have self keyword. Self refers to instance of that particular class in which that method is defined. Very important. Similarly, whenever we say self, this particular method belongs to that particular class. So if you are seeing, when I am saying self here, this particular method refers to this particular class. Very important. Similarly, whenever we create a function inside a class, by default it should have self keyword. When you create a function inside a class, by default it should have self keyword. Without self keyword, it will get an error. This is an syntax of Python. So when you create a function inside a class, definitely you should have self keyword. That is what the importance of self keyword, right? Similarly, what are the types of methods? Up to now, what we have done, we have seen how a function defined in a class is called as method. But in these methods also, there are different types of methods. One is static instance method. So instance method, what is the instance method? This is the instance method. So we can invoke this particular method by using an object. We can invoke not only this particular method, all the methods inside a class by using objects. As like here, we have created only one object. With that object, we have called method 1 display, method 2 print. Similarly, if we have 10 number of methods, we can use the same way. But this is nothing but an instance method. Directly, we have seen instance method. But there are another type of method, static method. What is static method? So static, let me make you example clearly so that we will go after the statement. Let me take the same example, right? Let me make that as a static method. So if you can see, what is the difference between instance method and static method? In instance method, you should call all the methods with the help of object. But in static method, wherever I define that method is a static, then I can directly call that method without object. Let me make you clear. So let me define this particular method as a static method. In order to define any method as a static method, we should use @static method. If I mention @static method, this particular method is nothing but a static method. Before that method, if I define that is a static method, then it is nothing but a static method. All right. So if I want to invoke this particular method without object, I can directly invoke. How I can, right? This is an instance method. So in order to invoke this instance method, what I have to do? I have to create one object. With this object, I have to invoke that instance method, right? But in order to invoke this particular static method, what I have to do? Directly, I have to create with the class. This is the class name. Dot. I can invoke this static method. See, static method, for the static method, I don't want to create an object. I can directly invoke this static method with the help of class only. My class dot display. So let us try to do the same. Mary, I'm just doing here. Let me try to comment this. Static is different instances. I mean, instance is different. Only difference is you will mention at the rate static here. So on display one positional argument. Yes, very important. See, when I declare any method is a static method, any method is a static method. Self is also considered as parameter. Self is also considered as parameter. So that is the reason display is a static method. What I am doing, I am just invoking this display method with the help of class. But for this display method, I have only passed the name, name like Mary. But what it is saying, missing one required positional argument. So it is assuming that this Mary is for self, right? Because what it is saying indirectly, self is also considered as keyword for static method, right? So what you should do, you should try to pass some random value, like some 1 2 3, just you need to pass. So if I pass that, let me make it clear. 1 2 3 here. For name I will use Mary. Very important point, all these are mentioned in material, don't worry. So this is the instance method, this is a display method. Now come to this. So there are two types of methods. One is instance method. We can call only through object. If you can see, we can call only through object. So all these are instance method. All these are instance methods. So this instance method only be called with the help of object. So object is nothing but instance of a class, right? Similarly, what is a static method? We can call directly using a class. If you can see here in the static example, this is the static method. Before that, I have defined at the rate static method. So I am saying that it is a static method. So I am calling that directly that static method using class, right? This is the class name, my class. With the class, what I am doing, I am directly invoking the static method. It is little bit confusing for you, but from 6th class onwards, all the concepts are somewhat, some tough concepts. Without practice, you will not understand clearly. All right. Similarly, we can invoke static method by directly using the class that we have seen now. Similarly, in order to define a method is a static method, we can use static at the rate static method. So when we declare any method is a static method, definitely self is also considered as a parameter in the static method. That is the reason why we have got an error here, right? So when we say instance method, self is there, but it is not a parameter, but it is referring to that particular class. So these are the examples which we have seen as a part of instance as well as a static method. There are a lot more examples I have given. Try to practice that. Similarly, variables. Yesterday we have seen local variables as well as global variables. But what we will see now, class variables. So the variables which are defined inside a class are nothing but class variables. Simple. Local variables is inside a function we have created yesterday. Similarly, global variables outside that function, and it can be accessible for all the functions in that particular module. That are global variables. But what are class variables? The variables which are created inside a class, right? This is a class. Inside a class, what I am doing, I am trying to create variables, class variables. So if I create class variables, these variables can be accessed for all the methods inside a class. You will not understand in this way. Let me try to create one example. This is class and object. Very important. Let me use this particular class only. Control C. Use another Python file. Class variables. Let me use this particular example. So this is a class, right? Inside the class, this is a method, right? And as well as this is another instance method. So let me define two variables inside a class. So if I create a variables inside a class, it is nothing but class variables. So let me create, suppose A is equal to 10. Similarly, B is equal to 20, right? So A is equal to 10, B is equal to 20. So these particular variables are having these particular values. So I can create the same meaning with the help of in this way. A comma B is equal to 10 comma 20. So what does it mean? A is equal to 10, B is equal to 20, right? So let me try to comment this and let me make you clear with in this way. A is equal to 10, right? B is equal to 20, but both are same only. Both are same. You can see here, A comma B is equal to 10 comma 20. You can define that variables values in this way or in this way also. Just without confusion, I'm just creating you like this. But if you are an expert or even for a beginner, you can create like this. That is not a problem. So what you are doing, you are taking these particular two variables and you want to add and you want to print the result. So without display, what I'm doing, I'm just defining add method. So in this add method, I'm not passing any values. So instead, what I'm doing, I have to print a plus b, and similarly, I have to multiply. So similarly, I should not pass anything. Let me try to make you how I can access class variables. So before going to that, what are class variables? If you define any variables inside a class, these are nothing but class variables. A comma b defined inside a class, these are class variables. So what I want to do with the help of these class variables, I want to do some operations inside the methods. Like I have to add as well as I have to methods. So what I'm doing, I'm defining a function inside a class. It is nothing but method. So I want to add two variables, print of a plus b. This is one way. Similarly, what I have to do, I have to print of a into b. Right? So what I have to do, I have to multiply those two variables of class, and thereafter I have to add as well. Right? Good. But if you see here, if I directly use the names a and b, this Python is saying that unsolved reference because these are class variables. You should not use directly. Class variable should not use directly. Instead, you have to use self keyword, because as like this particular method is having self keyword, which is referring to this particular class. Similarly, in order to access class variables, you should try to say that using self keyword. You have to use self. Very important. In order to access class variables, you have to use self dot variable name inside a method. Very important. Similarly, self dot a as well as self dot b, because what you are saying, when you define self, it is referring to this class. Inside the class, I am having the variables. What are the variables? Self dot b as well as self dot a. So in this way, you have to access class variables. So creating a variables inside a class and accessing that variables inside a method is very important. Very, very important. Now, how you can invoke these particular classes, methods? We have to create one object, right? My class. Similarly, with that object, you have to invoke, because these are instance methods. I have not defined that as a static method, right? So object dot, you can make that as a static method. That is your, it is another example. Try to practice that as an example. So right now, what I'm doing, I'm trying to take only instance method, right? So object dot add. Similarly, object dot multiply. I'm just invoking these particular methods, right? Let me try to print. So if you can see, one positional argument it is missing. Oh, my class dot add. Any mistake what I have done? Self. No, there is something fishy here. Good. Let me try to. It is referring to this particular class, and similarly self dot a plus self dot b, self dot a into self dot b, object dot add. Type error. My class dot add one required positional argument. Class variables. It is somewhat what it is. No. Yes. When you are creating an object of a class, definitely you have to use these brackets. Without that, it will try to raise another. That's what you are seeing here, right? If you can see here, it has invoked the methods inside a class. 30 as well as 200. 10 into 20, 200, 10 plus 20, 30. Right? In this way, you can create a class variable and you can access that class variables by using self keyword. By using self keyword. Very, 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 very important. Right? So these are class variables. Good. It is fine. What are global variables? Any variables which are defined outside a function are nothing but global variables. Yesterday we have discussed the function, so that is the reason. With respect to function, we are said that they are global variables. But with respect to class, what we have to say, if a variable is defined outside a class, those are nothing but global variables. Let us try to define some global variables here. So global variables here. Suppose I is equal to 15. Similarly, j is equal to 25. Right? So these are nothing but global variables, because these variables are defined outside the class. These are nothing but global variables. Right? Global variables. Very important. Yesterday we have discussed the functions. So with respect to function, I have said to you the global variables. Similarly, today we are discussing classes. So what I'm saying, I'm trying to make you understand with respect to classes. So any variable defined outside the class are nothing but global variables. Any variable defined outside the function are nothing but global variables. Right? So similarly, these are global variables. These are class variables, very important, right? Global and class, as well as local also. These are class variables. Similarly, what I will do, I will try to try to define local variables as well. Local variables as well. Let me try to make you understand. Like, let me try to define it here. Like some global variables. Some C is equal to 200. Some D is equal to 300. Right. So these are nothing but local variables. Very important. In the same example, what I am trying to convey, local variables as well as global variables as well as class variables. So as like yesterday we have discussed about, local variables are only accessed for that function in which they are defined. Similarly, class variables are only accessed in which the class they are defined. If you try to access outside of the class, then you will get an error. Let us try to see right now. So print of, what I want to do, I want to print I comma j, right? Because these are global variables, this can be accessible. Similarly, what I have to do, print of a comma b, these are class variables. A comma b, right? Good. These are local variables. C comma d, I have to print outside the class. Let me try to comment this. So if you see here, only global variables are accessed outside of class. But coming to class variables cannot be accessed outside of class, as well as similarly local variables cannot be accessed outside of a method, right? Similarly, because this is the function, but we have defined inside a class. So that is what I am saying, it is a method. So these are not accessible. Only global variables are accessible, right? Right. Name A is not defined because name error. Why we have got this A and B as well as C and D local and class variables only specified to that particular class as well as that particular method, right? Good. So we have used or invoked the class variables by using self keyword. Similarly, if I want to use local variables inside that particular method, what I can do directly, I can use print of C comma D. Yes, I can use, but I cannot access these local variables. In another method. Let's just try to print here. Right, let me comment this. If you can see here, it is automatically highlighting because these are local variables which are only accessible for this particular method. It is not accessible to other methods which are there inside the class. So that is the reason why you will get error here. Let me try to make this uncomment. Let me try to execute. If you can see, name C is not defined. Why it got C comma D are only specific to this particular method, not this for this method. So in this way, you can define a class variable as well as a local variable as well as a global variable. All right. Global variables can be accessible for all the classes or functions or methods in that particular library. But coming to class variables will only be accessible for the methods which are defined inside that particular class. Coming to local variables will only be accessible for the function or a method in which they are defined. Very important. Very important. All right. So let us try to see one more concept. Constructor. Let us try to see constructor. What is a method and constructor? So let us try to make you clear. Yes, good. Let us try to create one more example. Constructor. So let me use this particular example so that you can understand. This is a class variable. Good. Let me try to remove this. This is a class method. Good. Right. Try to remove this. Right. So constructor as well as a method. What is a constructor? A constructor is a special type of method. So in this context, you can assume that as a function here. A constructor is a special type of method. It is also a method. What it is saying, constructor is a method, but it's a special type. What is that special type? We will see in a while. So it is used to initialize instance members of the class. What are the instance members of the class? I can say simply instance variables. Of that particular class. So a constructor is a special type of method used to initialize instance members of the class. Let me make it clear with one example. Like, these are class variables. So these class variables, I can call them as instance members. These class variables, I can call them as an instance members. I can call them as an instance members, right? Similarly, what is a method? So for a method, I can give any name. I can give any name. But for a constructor, which is also a method, but it is only having hyphen hyphen in it only self. This is what the syntax we need to use, or the name we need to use for a constructor. This is the name what we have to use for a constructor. Very important. Method can be given any name. Method can be given any name, but constructor is only having one name, that is init. Similarly, method can return values. Similarly, as like in function, a function can return value, right? Similarly, a method can return a value, but constructor does not return any value. Constructor does not returns any value. Similarly, method can take arguments or parameters, as like here. If you can see here, this particular method, if I can pass some name is a argument, then it can take it. This method can take. Similarly, constructor also takes arguments or parameters. Good. Similarly, constructor can be called at the time of object creation. Constructor can be called at the time of object creation. You will not understand this point. Let me make it clear with one example. Similarly, in constructors, we have default as well as parameterized constructors. So default means if we have some value to positional arguments, then it is default constructor. So parameterized means we can use keywords yesterday as like parameter arguments. Like there are default as well as parameterized constructors. Let me use this particular example so that you can understand. Right, if you can see, Control V. Let me make these particular things. Okay. Right. So this is the constructor. Constructor is only having one name, hyphen hyphen underscore underscore init and self. Init and self. So what I am doing, I'm just printing one, like this is a constructor just for our information. Similarly, this is a method. So method can have any name. A method can return any value, but constructor does not return any value. So if you can see, when we create an object, MC here, it is nothing but an object. Constructor can be invoked automatically. So I am not calling the constructor explicitly. So instead, when I'm creating an object, constructor is automatically called. Constructor can automatically be called. Let us try to see. So if you can see, it is automatically called. So if you observe here, I am not calling this particular constructor. Instead, when you are creating an object itself, this particular constructor is invoked. Similarly, this is one important point, which is very important to remember. Similarly, what is a constructor? These are the differences. It is similarly a method, does not return value, can take arguments or parameters. At the time of object creation, constructor is itself automatically be called. So if you can see, this is the object creation. At the time of object creation, like during execution, it is automatically called. Inside the constructor, you can see this print statement. This print statement got executed at the time of object creation.